I never imagined that one Thursday night could shatter my life completely. I was at my desk, the warm glow of my laptop lighting up the exhaustion on my face after another long day running our marketing agency. It was 9 p.m., and I was finishing quarterly reports when my phone buzzed. A notification from Instagram made my chest tighten. It was him, my husband, Evan. He had posted, "Finally leaving my controlling wife for my soulmate. Time to embrace true love and know my worth." My hands shook. Soulmate? He meant Ronan, a woman I barely knew, yet who had somehow become the center of his world while I poured my heart into our life, our home, and our business. A wave of disbelief and icy rage hit me. How could the man I trusted erase years of commitment with a single post? His words painted me as the villain, controlling, suffocating the obstacle to his true happiness. My pulse raced, but after a stunned moment, I did something unexpected. I liked the post, not because I agreed, but to mark the moment the betrayal went public. Seconds later, my phone pinged. A message from him. "Did you seriously just like my post about leaving me?" I didn't respond immediately. I simply typed, "Yes, when are you moving out?" No pleading, no begging, no desperate attempts to salvage what had already been destroyed. He paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard, finally sending, "I'll be getting my stuff tomorrow. I deserve half the business. BW." And just like that, the life we had built together, the trust, the shared dreams, the years, crumbled. My mind, trained for strategy, immediately shifted to survival mode. The agency, the clients, the finances. This wasn't just betrayal in love. It was an attack on everything I had worked so hard to build. I closed my eyes, drew a deep, steadying breath, and silently vowed, I would not let this destruction go unchallenged. One thing was certain. My life would never be the same again. I was 35 when I met Evan. He was everything I thought I wanted in a partner, charming, ambitious, and so convincingly attentive that I let my guard down without even realizing it. I had spent most of my 20s building my career as a marketing strategist, climbing the ladder with sweat and stubborn determination. My life was structured, predictable, safe, and then he appeared with that effortless charisma and turned my world upside down. We met at a client networking event. I was presenting a campaign I had designed from scratch, my slides polished and rehearsed, and he approached me afterward, smiling, complimenting me on my vision and insight. At the time, I thought it was just flattery, but looking back, it was the beginning of a carefully constructed charm offensive. Evan didn't just talk to me, he listened. He remembered details about my life, my favorite coffee, even the little things I mentioned in passing about my family. Slowly I felt seen, truly seen, in a way that no one had ever managed before. We dated for 2 years before he proposed. Those early months were full of laughter, late-night brainstorming sessions over coffee, quiet dinners at my apartment, and weekends exploring the city. I introduced him to my family cautiously. They liked him instantly, and he made an effort to blend seamlessly into my world. I remember thinking, this is it. This is love. When we married, I was 31. Our wedding was small but elegant, a reflection of both our personalities. I worked alongside him on some business branding projects even before marriage, but after tying the knot, our lives intertwined in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. Evan was ambitious about his career and my career as well. He suggested we merge our efforts into a shared marketing agency where he would handle operations and I would focus on creative strategy. I trusted him completely, believing our combined strengths could create something extraordinary. But even in those early years, there were small signs I chose to ignore. Evan occasionally disappeared for late-night client meetings with vague explanations. Sometimes I would catch him on the phone, whispering, eyes flicking nervously toward me. I brushed it off, telling myself it was paranoia. He was just a busy man. His friends and colleagues often echoed the same sentiment. Evan is ambitious, he's focused, don't overthink it. I also had to navigate the delicate relationship with Ronan, his close colleague who had a history of personal entanglements, though I didn't know the full extent then. Ronan was brilliant, a creative force, and Evan would often mention her ideas and praise her contributions to the campaigns. I didn't feel threatened at first. I trusted him. But every dinner, every conversation, there was a subtle undercurrent of tension I couldn't quite name. My own family adored Evan, or so I thought. They were warm, sometimes overbearing, but protective. His family, however, was different. They had their own expectations, subtle pressure, quiet judgments, comments that often left me second-guessing my decisions. "Are you sure you want to invest so much of your time into his business?" his mother once asked, with a tone that implied I was overstepping my bounds. I brushed it off, determined to prove I belonged. Looking back, the threads of our story were tangled long before the dramatic Thursday night. There were moments I should have noticed, flashes of secrecy, hesitations, the slight discomfort when Ronan's name came up. But love makes you blind, and trust makes you forgiving. I believed in our partnership, in our marriage, in Evan's devotion. I was committed, deeply and fully, not just to him, but to the life we were building together. I didn't know then that the foundation I had thought was solid was already cracking beneath the surface, and I certainly didn't know that the man I trusted most would soon abandon me for a woman he called his soulmate, leaving behind the remnants of our carefully crafted life. That moment, our past, our love, the ignored warnings, would come crashing into me with a force I wasn't ready to face. At first, the cracks were subtle. A misplaced text here, a hurried phone call there. Evan would return from client dinners late at night, his cologne lingering in the air long after he left the room. I'd ask casually, "Everything okay?" And he'd smile, brushing it off with a joke. But the unease settled in my chest like a stone I couldn't dislodge. My intuition, honed by years of navigating high-stakes projects, whispered that something was off, but I buried it, unwilling to confront the possibility. Ronan's presence in our lives was another constant pressure I chose to ignore. She was everywhere, in our meetings, in brainstorming sessions, even appearing in casual conversations Evan would recount from his day. He praised her ideas openly, calling her the creative genius behind the campaigns, while subtly minimizing my own contributions. At the time, I shrugged it off. I told myself it was professional admiration, nothing more. But the compliments stung in a way I couldn't name, a quiet jealousy that ate at me when I was alone. Then came the invitations. "We should have dinner with Ronan this weekend," Evan suggested casually one Friday evening. I hesitated, feeling an inexplicable tension. Dinner felt harmless, but the undercurrent was palpable. I noticed the way his eyes lingered a fraction too long, the small smiles, the shared jokes I wasn't part of. I didn't speak up. I didn't want to appear controlling. But each encounter left a subtle mark, a small seed of doubt planted in my mind. The whispers of suspicion weren't just between us. Friends and colleagues began to notice changes in Evan's behavior. Invitations to events suddenly conflicted with his usual schedule, and his explanations became vague. His close friends, once casual and warm, now occasionally made comments that were difficult to parse. Ronan really brings out a different side of him, one would say, laughing, and I would force a smile, masking the irritation bubbling inside. Even at home, the atmosphere shifted. The laughter we once shared became quieter, more cautious. Our conversations felt choreographed, polite, but distant. Evan would often retreat to his office late into the night, claiming he needed to finalize campaign proposals or client contracts, yet the quiet hum of his laptop at odd hours suggested something more than work. I began to notice his guarded expressions when I approached, the slight hesitation in his tone when mentioning his day, the defensiveness when I asked mundane questions about meetings or emails. The seed of conflict was also planted by family. My own family, while supportive, occasionally questioned my choices. "I see. Are you sure he's treating you right?" Their concern wrapped in polite tones, but their worry resonated with the quiet fears I tried to suppress. Evan's family, on the other hand, subtly encouraged distance, commenting on my control or my perfectionism, planting doubts about my place in his life. It was a slow, steady erosion, a psychological pressure that I didn't fully recognize until the tension became almost tangible. Even with all these signs, I clung to trust. I wanted to believe that the man I loved, the life we had built, was secure. I replayed our shared history in my mind. The laughter, the late-night brainstorming sessions, the quiet moments when it felt like the world outside didn't exist, and I told myself that love could survive these minor disturbances. But the unease lingered, and the subtle, insidious cracks in our marriage began to widen, each unnoticed incident a tiny fracture waiting to become a chasm. By the time I sensed the full weight of betrayal, the groundwork had already been laid. Evan's growing detachment, the subtle favoritism toward Ronan, the whispered doubts from friends and family, all of it culminated in a tension that filled our home like a thick fog. I didn't yet know the full extent of the storm that awaited me, but the seeds of conflict had already taken root, and those seeds were about to bloom into a betrayal that would change everything. It was a Thursday night, the kind of quiet that makes everything feel magnified. I had stayed late at the office, reviewing final drafts for a client pitch, when a ping on my phone jolted me out of focus. Evan. A message notification, and not just a casual text, but a link to an Instagram post. My hands shook as I tapped it open. There she was, Ronan, smiling, radiant, perfectly posed in a sunlit cafe, and next to her, Evan. Not in a professional context, not at a company event. This was intimate, personal. The caption burned into my mind. Finally embracing true love, choosing happiness, choosing authenticity. Soulmates recognize each other. I felt my chest tighten, a cold wave of disbelief washing over me. My pulse raced, my vision tunneled, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a public declaration, a demolition of everything I had believed about our marriage. The life I had trusted him with, the vows we exchanged, the shared years of laughter and struggle, they were all being erased with a single post. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was staged. Maybe they were joking. But the comments under the post told a different story. Friends congratulating, strangers admiring, all feeding into a narrative I had no part in. My mind reeled, flipping through memories like a film reel. Late nights he claimed were work, small excuses, secret phone calls, evasive answers. Every ignored suspicion, every rationalized feeling of unease suddenly snapped into clarity. I called him immediately. Evan, what is this? My voice, usually steady, cracked under the weight of disbelief. It's me choosing my happiness, he replied, almost casually, as if our years together were an afterthought. Choosing happiness? With her? The words caught in my throat, a mix of anger and heartbreak I couldn't contain. Yes, Ronan gets me. She sees me. The real me, not the wife I was pretending to be. I felt nausea, my stomach twisting into knots. The real you, after everything we've built? After everything I've done for us? He paused, as if he had rehearsed his response. You know I've always been constrained, suffocated. I need freedom. I deserve to love who I want. Every word was a dagger, each sentence a reminder of the betrayal. My hands trembled, gripping the edge of my desk, knuckles white. My mind raced, not just with heartbreak, but with strategy, survival instincts kicking in. Our agency, the clients, the accounts, we had built something together, and I suddenly realized that he hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He had laid a foundation to undermine me professionally. I demanded to know the truth. How long? How long has this been going on? Months, maybe longer, but it's over now. We're meant to be together, he said, his tone almost serene, as if confessing a trivial fact. I hung up before I could say anything else. My mind reeled. I could feel the tears prickling at the edges of my eyes, but I blinked them away. I couldn't afford to collapse. Not yet. There were practicalities, logistics, finances. I had to act. But more than that, I had to process the raw, searing pain of the betrayal. That night, I sat alone in the office, the hum of fluorescent lights above me, the familiar scent of my workspace grounding me in reality. Every memory of Evan, every moment we had shared, clashed violently with the reality of his public declaration with Ronan. I went through our messages, our emails, reminders of meetings and deadlines, the quiet moments of shared laughter that now felt like taunts. And through it all, I felt a quiet, simmering rage, not just at him, but at the audacity of their public display, the way they had erased me from their narrative, the way Evan had chosen someone else, flaunting it for the world to see. By the end of that night, I made a silent vow. I would not crumble. I would not be erased. I would confront this betrayal, piece together the truth, and reclaim what was rightfully mine, not just for myself, but for the life I had built, the agency I had nurtured, and the dignity I refused to surrender. That Thursday night marked the point of no return. My life had been irrevocably changed, and I knew that everything that followed would demand strength, cunning, and a resolve I wasn't sure I possessed, yet. The morning after discovering Evan's betrayal, I woke up with a heavy weight pressing against my chest. The sunlight streaming through the blinds couldn't touch the storm raging inside me. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the blank wall, my mind replaying every word, every image from last night's revelation. The thought that Evan, the man I had trusted with my heart and our shared life, had publicly chosen another woman. It made my stomach churn with a mixture of grief, disbelief, and anger I couldn't fully articulate. I tried to ground myself with logic. Our agency, our clients, the finances, I had to separate the emotional from the practical. But the emotional impact clawed at me, relentless. I kept asking myself, how did I not see it? Was I blind all this time? Did I ignore the signs? My mind sifted through the memories, late-night excuses, evasive answers, the way he praised Ronan excessively, the subtle distance that had grown between us over months. Each recollection felt like a small betrayal that had led to this shattering moment. I decided to confront him, but not with hysteria or tears. I needed clarity. I needed facts. I found him sitting in his office, casually sipping coffee as if nothing had happened. My pulse spiked, but I controlled my voice. "Evan, we need to talk." He looked up, mild surprise crossing his face. "I think we've already said everything, haven't we?" "No, I need details. Tell me how long. Tell me everything. I need to know the truth from you, not from a post." He sighed, leaning back, the casual posture grating against my rising anger. "It's not that complicated. I'm with Ronan now. We love each other. That's it." I felt my hands clench into fists, my breath coming in shallow bursts. "Do you have any idea what this does to me? To everything we built? Our home, our agency, our life together?" His expression didn't falter. In fact, it seemed almost rehearsed, detached. "I made my choice. I'm sorry it hurts, but it's the truth." The words stung, but I forced myself to maintain composure. I couldn't let emotion dictate my response. I needed a plan. My mind began ticking through contingencies: access to our business accounts, the company credit cards, client relationships. I reminded myself that while he had betrayed me emotionally, he had not yet undermined my professional control. That was my leverage. I spent the next hours gathering myself, reviewing the company's financials, tracing access logs, confirming contracts. Every detail mattered. Evan had assumed I would crumble, that my grief would paralyze me, but I refused to give him that satisfaction. I would act decisively, strategically. The betrayal hurt, yes, but anger and clarity combined could be powerful tools. I also allowed myself the grief. Quiet moments when no one was watching, I let the tears fall, the sobs racking my body. But I didn't wallow. Each tear was a reminder of my strength, my resilience, and the life I was determined to reclaim. I reminded myself, this is not the end. This is the beginning of a reckoning. That afternoon, I confronted Evan again, this time with a list of questions about access, legal obligations, and company procedures. He squirmed slightly, the bravado slipping. I realized then that his public declaration of love for Ronan did not make him invincible. It merely exposed the cracks in his judgment, his arrogance. By the evening, I had made a decision. I would protect the company, our assets, and my own emotional stability. I would not beg, I would not plead. I would confront the betrayal directly, gather evidence, and ensure that Evan and Ronan understood that their choices would have consequences beyond just our marriage. As I sat alone, late at night, the city lights twinkling outside my office window, a sense of grim determination settled over me. I would not let heartbreak define me. I would face the aftermath with courage, intelligence, and unflinching resolve. This was the moment where I realized the true test of strength is not in avoiding betrayal, but in standing tall when it happens, and I was ready to stand taller than ever before. The days that followed were a whirlwind of tension, confrontation, and chaos. Evan's betrayal was no longer just a private wound. It had spilled into every corner of my life, intertwining with work, friends, and family. What started as a quiet betrayal had become a storm that threatened to consume everything. On the second day after the post, I arrived at the agency to find Ronan waiting outside, confidently greeting clients and even taking liberties with the office space. Her ease made my blood boil. She was smiling, directing our receptionist, acting as if she owned the place. And Evan, he was absent. Of course he was. He was basking in the public approval of his soulmate status, leaving me to clean up the mess. I pulled myself together and began asserting control. I immediately revoked her access to the company accounts and client management systems, changed passwords, and informed the building management about office access restrictions. She protested, her voice dripping with false outrage. "This is illegal. You can't just lock me out," she shrieked, as if the universe owed her compliance. I remained calm, letting each word fall into the emptiness of rational authority. This isn't about emotion. It's about facts and ownership. Meanwhile, Evan's friends and family began taking sides, or at least pretending to. Some of his colleagues whispered doubts about my capabilities, echoing the subtle manipulations that had seeded the conflict weeks before. "Maybe you should compromise for the sake of peace," one friend suggested, clearly trying to play mediator while casting blame on me. I listened silently, filing each comment away for later, my mind like a steel trap of observation. Evan's family, predictably, began pressuring me as well. His mother called, speaking in syrupy tones, trying to manipulate guilt. "You always had everything handed to you. Maybe you're overreacting," she said. Her words were an attempt to undermine my confidence, to make me doubt my rightful authority over our business and life. I remained polite, but internally, my resolve hardened. I will not allow manipulation to dictate my actions. As the week progressed, the escalation intensified. Ronan's facade began to crack under pressure. She tried to charm our biggest clients, claiming credit for campaigns she had barely contributed to, even promising future projects to vendors in exchange for loyalty. I received frantic calls from printers and service providers, confused and expecting payments that weren't authorized. Each message, each misguided promise only confirmed her inexperience and impulsive arrogance. I couldn't help but feel a dark, ironic satisfaction. Their scheme was unraveling, and I was the calm observer steering the ship. Then came the confrontations. Ronan, emboldened by social media, stormed into the office demanding access, shouting about entitlement, creative genius, and freedom. Evan's absence left her exposed. She had assumed he would shield her, but now she was facing reality. I confronted her, voice steady but edged with steel. "Everything personal is yours to collect. The office, the clients, the accounts, none of it belongs to you." Her outrage only intensified. She called me every name in the book, claiming emotional abuse, professional sabotage, and conspiracy. I listened, unmoved, documenting everything, every word, every action, a meticulous record for later use. Meanwhile, Evan attempted to mediate, but his words revealed his true priorities. "She's going through a lot. Can't you just help her?" he asked, as if my compassion was the problem. I realized then that he was not only complicit but emotionally invested in the drama he had orchestrated. My fury bubbled beneath the surface, but I didn't give him the satisfaction of witnessing it. Instead, I focused on what mattered: protecting the company, maintaining my composure, and letting their overconfidence become their undoing. By midweek, Ronan began losing ground. Clients, initially intrigued by her claims, realized she lacked the expertise and authority to deliver. Vendors grew frustrated with her empty promises, escalating their complaints. Even Evan's friends started noticing inconsistencies in her story. Each failed attempt at control, each unraveling of her carefully constructed narrative, fed a quiet vindication within me. The chaos she had tried to wield as power was crumbling, piece by piece. I also spent time with my own family, who provided unwavering support. They reminded me of my worth, my accomplishments, and my right to stand firm. Their validation fortified my resolve. I realized that while betrayal had rocked my world, it had also clarified the people who truly mattered, those who offered loyalty and love without expectation. By the end of the week, the situation had escalated to the point where legal counsel became necessary. Every interaction, every confrontation was meticulously documented, creating a web of evidence that would leave no doubt about ownership, responsibility, and accountability. I was no longer reacting emotionally. I was orchestrating the aftermath, controlling the narrative, and preparing for the inevitable consequences that Evan and Ronan would face. The escalation, intense and exhausting, left me drained but empowered. The betrayal had ignited a fire within me, a fire that refused to be extinguished by deception, arrogance, or public humiliation. I had confronted the chaos, faced the manipulations, and emerged not broken, but stronger. And yet, I knew the darkest moments were still ahead. The low point, the emotional nadir, had yet to arrive. But I was ready to face it, armed with clarity, resilience, and an unshakable sense of self. By the seventh day, the weight of everything pressed down on me like a storm that wouldn't relent. The emotional exhaustion was palpable, a deep ache radiating from my chest to my fingertips. Even as I maintained control at the office, behind the calm facade, I felt the walls closing in. The betrayal had not just stripped trust from our marriage, it had stripped a part of my identity, leaving me raw, vulnerable, and achingly alone. I returned home one evening to an empty apartment, the silence deafening. Evan's presence lingered in the spaces between furniture, in the faint scent of his cologne that hadn't yet faded. The images from Instagram replayed in my mind. Evan smiling at Ronan, their hands intertwined, the casual intimacy that had never existed with me. I felt a hollow emptiness, a profound sense of loss that had nothing to do with material possessions. It was a loss of a shared life, of dreams and promises. For hours, I sat on the couch, staring at the floor, unable to summon even a spark of motivation. Every plan I had made, every calculation, every effort to maintain control felt simultaneously necessary and unbearably futile. The world outside continued as if nothing had happened. Emails landed in my inbox, clients called with questions, deadlines loomed. But inside me, the storm raged unchecked. I couldn't stop thinking about Ronan, about Evan's indifference to the devastation he had caused. How easily they had rewritten our shared history, how casually they had dismissed my years of dedication, my emotional investment. I felt anger, yes, but it was tangled with something deeper, an aching, raw grief that made my vision blur. Then came the personal attacks. Anonymous messages, snide remarks from people we knew, and even thinly veiled criticism from Evan's friends chipped away at my sense of self. Maybe you should have tried harder. Maybe this is your fault. Those words, though unspoken in most cases, echoed in my mind. Doubt crept in, uninvited, whispering that perhaps I had failed, not just as a wife, but as a partner, a professional, a woman who deserved love. The night felt interminable. I paced the apartment, hands clenching and unclenching, my heart pounding in relentless rhythm. Sleep was impossible. The silence amplified the betrayal, the absence, the loss. I imagined confrontations with Evan, dialogues that would never occur, apologies that would never come. Each imagined scenario left me feeling smaller, fragile, as if the ground beneath me had dissolved. At my lowest point, I found myself in front of our shared photo albums, images of vacations, milestones, quiet dinners. Memories of joy clashed violently with the reality of their destruction. I touched the edges of the pictures, tracing faces I had loved, remembering laughter that now felt like a cruel joke. I realized how deeply intertwined my life had been with his, and how thoroughly that life had been upended. Tears came unbidden, hot and relentless. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to grieve openly. My body shook with sobs, the sound filling the empty apartment, a raw acknowledgement of the pain that had been simmering beneath controlled composure. This was the chasm I had feared, the emotional nadir, the moment when strength seemed insufficient and despair threatened to overtake me. But even in that darkness, a flicker of awareness persisted. Between sobs, between waves of hopelessness, a single thought emerged. I am still here. I am not erased. The clarity was faint but undeniable. The storm had struck, yes, but it had also revealed my capacity for endurance. I realized that to rise, I first had to confront the depths, acknowledge the despair, and let it pass through me rather than consume me. By the time dawn crept through the blinds, I was exhausted but strangely resolute. I had touched the bottom, stared into the void, and lived to see the light return. The heartbreak remained, the sense of loss lingered, but the seed of resolve had been planted. I knew then that the next steps, gathering evidence, confronting Evan and Ronan, reclaiming what was mine, would require all the strength I could muster, and I was ready to begin. The days following my emotional collapse were quiet, almost deceptively so. The storm outside, the confrontations, the public drama, the manipulations had settled momentarily, giving me a chance to think, to plan, to breathe. It was in this silence that I began to find clarity, the turning point that would shift me from victim to strategist. I started going through our business accounts in detail, meticulously examining every transaction, every access log, every client communication. What I found was enlightening. Ronan had no legitimate contributions to our campaigns. Every claim of ownership, every promise to clients, was built on deception and half-truths. Evan, who had publicly sided with her, had no understanding of the operational realities I had managed alone for years. I felt a rush of empowerment as I compiled evidence, screenshots of emails, copies of invoices, records of unauthorized credit card usage, proof of her empty promises to vendors and clients. All of it painted a clear picture. They were acting recklessly, arrogantly, and illegally. The betrayal was deep, yes, but so was my preparation to reclaim control. For the first time in over a week, I felt a surge of control over the narrative that had threatened to crush me. A turning point came when an unexpected ally reached out, Jerome, from the design firm next door. He had observed Ronan's antics firsthand and confirmed what I already suspected. She was out of her depth. His candid observations bolstered my confidence, reminding me that the truth, once documented and presented carefully, could stand unassailable. With evidence in hand, I confronted Evan privately. My voice was calm, unwavering, carrying the weight of authority that had grown through my ordeal. Evan, the truth is undeniable. You and Ronan have misrepresented everything: clients, vendors, company access. I am giving you the chance to rectify this, but the responsibility rests squarely with you. His face fell slightly, the first crack in his composure I had noticed since the initial revelation. He tried to argue, to justify, but every point he made only highlighted his ignorance of the company he had relied on me to manage. I realized then that Evan's arrogance had been his weakness all along. His public post, his disregard for the business, his blind loyalty to Ronan, they had left him exposed. The clarity deepened when I reflected on my own worth. The grief, the betrayal, the public humiliation, all of it had been a crucible, forging a steelier, sharper version of myself. I was no longer a woman reacting solely to heartbreak. I was a woman taking deliberate, strategic action to reclaim her life, her career, and her dignity. I am not defined by their choices. I define my own path. I decided on decisive action. Legal counsel was engaged, evidence presented, and communication structured. But beyond the practical steps, I also made an internal decision. I would not beg, I would not plead, I would not waste energy on people who had chosen deception over loyalty. My focus shifted entirely to myself, my business, and the life I would rebuild. In those quiet moments, I felt a shift in power. The same fear, the same despair that had immobilized me days before, now transformed into resolve. I realized that the ultimate power lay not in controlling Evan or Ronan, but in controlling myself, my reactions, my decisions, and my future. By the end of that day, the turning point was complete. I had discovered the evidence, validated my strength, and made the conscious decision to act, not out of revenge, but out of self-preservation and justice. The storm of betrayal had been weathered, and now I stood at the precipice of reclaiming everything that was mine, prepared to navigate the fallout with clarity and unshakable confidence. The transformation was subtle yet profound. I was no longer the woman who had stumbled into this betrayal blinded by trust. I was a strategist, a survivor, a force ready to restore order to the chaos that Evan and Ronan had created. And for the first time in over a week, I slept with a sense of purpose, knowing that tomorrow the reckoning would begin. The morning after my turning point, the world seemed almost surreal. The storm that Evan and Ronan had created for me was now turning against them, and I watched with a quiet, almost clinical satisfaction as their carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The first sign came from our clients. I sent a professional note clarifying ownership and responsibilities, attaching documented proof of all authorized campaigns and payments. Responses poured in, polite but pointed. Confusion, disbelief, and finally, alignment with the facts. Many clients had been swayed by Ronan's confidence initially, but when confronted with actual records, the truth was undeniable. The power dynamic had shifted. Vendors, who had been promised payments by Ronan, began calling her directly, frustrated that their invoices were not being honored. I remained calm, providing them with the facts, explaining clearly that she had no authority to commit our resources. One by one, their frustration turned into resentment toward Ronan, and by extension, Evan, who had supported her claims. Even Evan's friends and colleagues, who had initially tried to mediate or subtly blame me, began to see the reality. Whispers turned into candid conversations. "We didn't know the whole story," one admitted. Another colleague apologized for questioning my judgment, acknowledging that I had always been the driving force behind the agency's success. It was a quiet vindication, but deeply satisfying. The personal fallout hit Ronan the hardest. She had presented herself as competent and commanding, but the evidence painted her as inexperienced and opportunistic. Social media posts bragging about her creative genius were met with skepticism and, in some circles, ridicule. Clients shared their confusion, vendors posted their grievances online, and her narrative began to unravel publicly. Meanwhile, Evan's support, both emotional and strategic, proved inadequate. He had relied too heavily on her charm and confidence, without understanding the mechanics of the business he claimed to value. The legal side of things was straightforward. My lawyer presented the documented evidence to address any claims of entitlement or ownership from Ronan or Evan. Because the business had been my creation, premarital and fully documented, there was no legal footing for their exaggerated demands. Temporary support was minimal, and any attempts at spousal claims were dismissed. The law had sided with clarity, ownership, and fact, and I had both. Despite the chaos around them, I maintained a composed presence. I didn't gloat. I didn't argue publicly. I simply acted decisively, letting the facts and evidence speak for themselves. The irony was sharp. The more they had tried to appear powerful, the more exposed they became, while I moved calmly, methodically, and effectively. By midweek, Ronan's frustration reached its peak. She had attempted to poach clients directly, only to face polite refusals and a clear statement of boundaries. Her social media presence, once a curated display of success, began to feel hollow. Her audience dwindled as the story spread. Even friends and acquaintances questioned her credibility. Evan, meanwhile, found himself isolated. Friends who had supported him initially began to withdraw, disappointed by his poor judgment and the consequences of his loyalty to Ronan. His family, who had once subtly pressured me to compromise, now watched him face the repercussions of his choices. I felt no pleasure in their discomfort. It was simply a natural outcome of their actions. Through it all, I remained centered. I reclaimed control over the company fully, reinstated trusted staff, and began strategizing for growth without the distractions of betrayal. I realized that the true power lay not in retaliation, but in restoration, restoring my business, my routine, and my sense of self. By the end of the week, the chaos had settled. Ronan disappeared from the office, her influence gone. Evan's attempts to justify his actions were met with polite but firm boundaries. I watched as their shared illusion of power dissolved, leaving them to navigate the consequences of their choices. And I walked away, not vengeful, not bitter, but composed, strong, and unshakably self-assured. The fallout was complete. Their credibility, authority, and influence had collapsed, while I emerged with control, clarity, and dignity intact. I was no longer the woman manipulated, betrayed, or undermined. I was the woman who had endured, strategized, and risen above. And in that calm, I finally felt the freedom to breathe, to plan, and to move forward on my own terms. In the quiet that followed the storm, I finally allowed myself to exhale. The chaos, the betrayal, the relentless manipulation, It had all passed, leaving me with something far more valuable than revenge: clarity and self-possession. I was free, not because Evan or Ronan had faltered, but because I had reclaimed my own power. The office, once a battleground, now felt like a sanctuary. I reorganized, rehired, and reestablished protocols, not out of fear, but out of a renewed sense of purpose. Every client conversation, every vendor interaction was a quiet affirmation that I was the architect of my own success. The company thrived, not because of anyone else's choices, but because I had the knowledge, vision, and resilience to guide it forward. I took time for myself, something I had neglected while caught in the whirlwind of betrayal. Long walks, quiet evenings with a book, a return to hobbies I had abandoned, all became rituals of healing. The emotional scars remained, of course, but they served as reminders of endurance rather than wounds of shame. I realized that strength is not the absence of pain, but the ability to carry it with dignity. And then came perspective. I saw clearly the patterns, the allure of quick promises, the seductive power of false charm, the temptation to justify the unjustifiable. But I also saw my own growth, the courage to face reality, the patience to gather evidence, the wisdom to act decisively without succumbing to chaos. I had learned, above all, that self-worth cannot be dictated by others, and that the truth will always surface when met with careful persistence. As for Evan and Ronan, their narratives dissolved into the background of my life. Their choices had consequences, as all actions do, and I no longer had space for anger or obsession. Instead, I focused on the people and pursuits that truly mattered: my career, my autonomy, my inner peace. The lesson, I realized, was simple yet profound. When someone shows you their true nature, through betrayal, manipulation, or deception, believe them, but do not let it define you. Protect your boundaries, document the truth, and act with integrity. And above all, remember that your strength, your vision, and your life belong to you, and no one else. I move forward with calm confidence, carrying the weight of experience lightly, no longer haunted by the past, but guided by it. I had survived the storm and emerged not just intact, but empowered, wiser, and ready to embrace the next chapter of life on my own terms.